We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress. And I'd remind you that when the U.S. government designates an entity as a foreign terrorist organization, it must report that to Congress and to the
Pam Bondi had one responsibility, and that was to keep everything under control, but she failed to do even that. She appeared before Congress and refused to give a direct answer about whether she helped create a secret list of Americans that the White House had once described as domestic terrorists. Instead of responding clearly, she stalled, changed the subject, and even mocked the congresswoman who was pressing her for answers. Then she walked out of that hearing room acting like she had escaped the pressure without consequences, but she was completely wrong because while she was busy sparring with Mary Gay Scanlon, trouble was already building around her from two different sides at the exact same time. One issue involved the growing Epstein cover-up accusations, and the other centered on possible contempt of Congress claims. On their own, either scandal could drag her into a federal courtroom, but combined together, they could become serious enough to threaten her freedom entirely.
memo. But as you know, as a lawyer, holding beliefs that the White House disagrees with is not a crime. And the statute defining domestic terrorism requires criminal acts, not just thoughts and ideas. That's why legal experts, nonprofit leaders, religious freedom and civil rights advocates immediately raised the alarm that the new presidential directive was a politically motivated attack on civil society designed to silence those who disagree with the administration. So, Ms. Bondi, Section 3 of that memo directed you, as Attorney General, to submit to the President and Stephen Miller a list of groups or entities whose members are engaged in acts that meet the definition of domestic terrorism. And then on December 4th, you directed the FBI to work with a variety of law enforcement entities to compile a list of groups and entities engaged in such acts by January 3rd, 2026, and to update that report every 30 days thereafter. So can we assume that you or persons under your direction at the Department of Justice have prepared that list of groups or entities who are designated as domestic terrorist organizations? And I just remind you that's a yes or no question. Did you prepare the list?
I'm not going to answer it yes or no, but what I will say is I know Antifa is part of that. I will talk to you about that.
I'm reclaiming my time. I asked you whether you
an Antifa
prepared
member
a
was
list.
arrested in Minneapolis federal court for
my
civil
time.
snarky.
Did you
They
have
ask a question and don't want an answer.
The answer is yes or no.
Time belongs to the gentleman from Pennsylvania. Gentleman can proceed.
Okay. So, will you commit to providing this committee with any list of organizations that you have recommended be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
We will comply with the law in all matters.
Will you commit to provide this committee with your list of entities that you recommend be designated as domestic terrorist organizations?
I'm not going to commit to anything to you because you won't let me answer questions.
Okay, well then we do understand that your current position is that you have a secret list of people or groups that you are accusing of domestic terrorism, but you won't share it with Congress. And I'd remind you that when the U.S. government designates an entity as a foreign terrorist organization, it must report that to Congress and to the entity, because the government can make a mistake and the entity has the opportunity to contest it. So your position seems to be that if you falsely designate an American or an American organization as a terrorist group, there's nothing they can do about it. I think we get it. You don't want to answer the question.
No, you don't get anything regarding public safety.
Thank you.
Nothing.
Thank you for the insult. It's clear you didn't come to Congress prepared to answer questions that the American people have every right to have answered. But if you were to prepared to answer truthfully, here's what we expect the facts to show. The administration is keeping lists of Americans who the White House says are engaged in domestic terrorism. Those lists could include Americans who have not committed any acts of terrorism, but simply disagree with this administration, people like Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And your list may include clergy, elected officials, and members of indivisible groups across the country. And those lists likely don't include Proud Boys or Oath Keepers who were actually convicted. Americans have never tolerated political demagogues who use the government to punish people on an enemies list. It brought down McCarthy, it brought down Nixon, and it will bring down this administration as well.
You're right. That's why we're so glad they rescinded the memorandum targeting parents. For goodness sake, as the gentleman from California just pointed.
Let's begin with what just happened in that hearing, because Mary Gay Scanlon asked Pam Bondi a very simple and direct question. Did the Department of Justice create a list of organizations it wanted to label as domestic terrorist groups? It was a clear yes or no question, but while Bondi admitted the list existed, she refused to hand it over to Congress. Her response basically amounted to this: yes, the government has the list. No, the public cannot see it, and Congress has no power to force the issue. Think about how serious that really is. The former Attorney General of the United States openly admitted that her department created a secret government list involving Americans and American organizations accused of terrorism, then dismissed the concerns of elected lawmakers as if they had no right to question it. Scanlon immediately called it what many people believe it is: a secret enemies list with no transparency, no due process, and no opportunity for those accused to even know they were being targeted. Normally, when the government labels a foreign organization as terrorist-related, Congress must be notified and the organization is given a chance to challenge the designation, yet Bondi's position appeared to suggest that American citizens should receive even fewer protections than foreign groups. To critics, that does not sound like a legal argument at all. It sounds like raw government power being used without limits. Then came the Epstein issue, because what Bondi did during that exchange with Scanlon looked like a warning sign for how she handled one of the biggest political scandals in modern America. Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act, Donald Trump signed it into law, and the Justice Department was legally required to release the complete unredacted files by December 19, 2025. Bondi missed that deadline, and when documents were eventually released, the department heavily protected the names of influential men, while exposing the identities and deeply personal abuse details connected to victims. Survivors linked to Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking network sat inside that hearing room back in February, and Bondi reportedly would not even turn around to acknowledge them. She refused to apologize and dismissed the outrage as political theatrics. Representative Hank Johnson confronted her directly and asked how many lives had been damaged because the department was either careless and incompetent or intentionally trying to intimidate and punish the women involved. Bondi's response was simply to tell him that his speaking time had ended. When lawmakers demanded to know how many of Epstein's alleged co-conspirators had actually been indicted under her leadership, the answer was 0. The official who was expected to bring justice to trafficking survivors instead became accused of protecting powerful figures whose identities remained hidden from the public. Then in April, Trump fired her. No official explanation was ever publicly given, but the timing raised immediate questions. Reports claimed he was angry over how she handled the Epstein documents, not because too much was hidden, but because the situation was no longer fully under control. The moment Bondi lost her position, she appeared to disappear from public accountability as well. She had already received a legally binding bipartisan subpoena ordering her to testify before the House Oversight Committee on April 14th, yet she never showed up. There was no message, no explanation, no communication from legal counsel, only complete silence. Democrats introduced a contempt resolution just 45 minutes later, and only after that filing did Republicans suddenly announce a future appearance date for her testimony. Bondi is now scheduled to appear on May 29th, but the facts surrounding the situation remain serious. She ignored a congressional subpoena, and the Department of Justice later claimed she had already coordinated the date with Democrats, something Chairman Comer himself admitted publicly was not true. Critics now argue that a former attorney general avoided Congress while officials inside her own department attempted to cover for her absence. Representatives Ted Lieu and Dan Goldman have already pushed for a special counsel investigation into Bondi over accusations of perjury, specifically tied to statements she allegedly made under oath regarding what the Epstein files contained about Donald Trump. Bondi insisted there was no evidence Trump committed a crime, and when lawmakers confronted her with claims contradicting that statement, she reportedly stood by her testimony instead of backing away from it. Representative Summer Lee introduced articles of impeachment in March, and the accusations listed against Bondi are extensive. They include defying the House Oversight Committee subpoena, violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act, committing perjury during congressional testimony, abusing prosecutorial authority, and ignoring federal court orders. That is not being described as one misunderstanding or a single bad decision. Critics say it reflects a much larger pattern involving a former attorney general accused of using the Justice Department against political enemies, hiding evidence connected to a trafficking network in order to shield influential figures, avoiding Congress when investigators demanded answers, and then allegedly misleading lawmakers under oath once the pressure intensified. To many observers, that is the profile of someone who should be sitting in a courtroom as a defendant instead of speaking from a podium about law and order. Bondi spent years building her image around tough legal accountability, but now she is the one facing contempt accusations, perjury allegations, impeachment articles, and mounting scrutiny, while survivors connected to Jeffrey Epstein's abuse are still waiting for the truth from people in power. The secret enemies list, the Epstein controversy, the contempt battle, and the accusations of lying under oath have all become linked together in the public conversation, and every road now seems to point directly back to her. She believed keeping everything buried would protect her, but scandals this large rarely stay hidden forever. Eventually, they rise back to the surface, and when that moment finally arrives, she may no longer be able to shut the conversation down by telling Congress that its time is over.